Welcome, Ambreia, to the show. I'm really excited to speak to you. It's been, I don't know, I think we've tried to schedule this about a couple of times and we've had to keep moving it. So,
Life.
welcome to the show, and please tell the listeners a little bit about you and what you do.
All right. I hate this question. I always do. It's the worst question ever. Um, because I feel like there's so much and there's such a complexity and a simplicity to the things that I do.
Mhm.
Um, so I am a writer who has written literally hundreds of articles about health, wellness, more recently, kind of like mothering and the Black maternal experience. I'm a mom of two little humans. I dabble in a little bit of reproductive justice advocacy. And I'm a creative. I'm a confused person. I'm just a lot.
Everything.
I'm everything. I'm just a big compilation of things.
Well, I came across you on Instagram, your free Black motherhood page,
Mhm.
and I was like, wow, yes, please, give me more. And so, if you could just talk a little bit about what that means to you, what are we freeing ourselves from?
Yes, yes. So a few months ago, I found the best way to summarize that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll start there and then I'll expand later. And kind of the way I've been framing it is, I don't know your life and struggles, so I can't tell you what you need to be free from. I can't tell you what freedom looks like for you as an individual, but I can kind of model what it looks like to go through the process of figuring out like what some of those traumas, discomforts, things that are holding us back, not just in motherhood and mothering, but also in life in general.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so in my case, freedom looks like self-acceptance. It looks like dealing with the good and the bad, learning to embrace the things that make me complex and the paradoxes of who I am, as opposed to like hiding the parts that don't
Mm-hmm.
quite fit or trying to cut them out or, cloak them and just kind of bringing them all into the fold. And so it kind of started because it started for a lot of different reasons. It started in like the general sense before it had the name Free Black Motherhood, because I was really struggling with motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have all, as you can gather, I've always been an out of the box kind of person. And I don't do well with anything where people are like, here is a role, this is how you should look when you do it. That's the good way to send me down a path of overwhelm, distress,
Yeah.
frustration, depression, all of those things. And so when I first began my motherhood journey, I was trying so hard to cram myself into the boxes of what a quote unquote good mother looked like, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, I was up against that, knowing that examples of like mothers generally, let alone quote unquote good mothers, were almost never Black. They were
Mm-hmm.
not talking to the complexities of our stories. They weren't talking about blended families. They weren't talking about legacies of enslavement and oppression. They weren't talking about like transnational experiences. There was just so much that was missing.
Yeah.
Because again, it was a box, boxes work with oversimplification. And so, like piece by piece, I realized that I could hold on to these narrow depictions of motherhood and how I was supposed to be, or and lose myself completely, or
Mm-hmm.
I could hold some sanity. From there, that was kind of like the silent process of getting there, right? And then the final kind of put the bow on top is I ended up having a chance to go back to school for my master's, and I focused on American Studies, which is chaos of things you learn, some cool, some very awful, lots very awful, but
Yeah.
it's what it is. And I ended up deciding to focus kind of on like the Black mothering experience, or just like theories and like existence of reproduction. So I got to study
Mhm.
like motherhood as a academic discipline and learning about how motherhood can be connected or can be in conflict with systems of oppression and all of these other things. And so at the time, I came across this term called, or this English legal principle called parta sequitur ventrum, which is Latin and translates to the status of the child follows the mother. And it was some of that foundational literature, that's some of those foundational decisions that they were using, one, to designate Black women's bodies as a site of enslavement and control. And two, that would literally change the course of how I perceived mothering and child rearing for the rest of my life. Because as we know, in that time, we were often giving birth, but rarely given the chance to mother.
Wow. Yeah.
And so in that moment, I realized it was a longer process, but this is, of course, the short version, that if my children's bondage could follow me, my children's freedom could follow me too. And all of these models around like gentle parenting and like stuff, like those things are wonderful and there's a place for them. But I realized for me as an individual, my work was not breaking down walls for my children's freedom. Like, to me, that's not new for Black and other marginalized parents to do what they could to push their children close to freedom. What is new is an intentional decision to say, you're not going without me. We are experiencing and journeying into freedom together. And the rest was just kind of random thoughts and writing and stuff. And look, that was a very long answer to your question. My bad.
No. I love it. That's great, because I feel like for me, it was far more sort of tame than that. Because for me, it all just started with a question of, why do you do? I sat myself down and asked myself, why do I do the things I do? And how many people never ask themselves that question? How many people just kind of go along with whatever is fine and whatever everyone else is doing, and afraid, like you said, to be authentic, but that's a very scary question, because when you decide to be authentic, you have to be prepared for rejection.
Yep.
And nobody wants to be rejected.
Yep.
But it's necessary part of being authentic. And so for me, learning to live as that sort of like black sheep, I suppose, the one that does things a little bit different. Oh, here goes Paula again, doing, what she does that nobody else is doing, and kind of accepting that I'm a little bit separate, and that's okay. But I know for a lot of people, for a lot of mothers, they don't want to be separate. They want to be part of the whole the whole thing, and I remember a very specific example of going, one of those mum and baby groups, and I made a joke about, it was about finding parenting hard and when you want to lose your temper. I've made some sort of joke, and the way nobody laughed at my joke and everyone looked at me kind of horrified, and I was like, these are not my people. So and I think part of it is finding your people, finding your tribe, finding those who sort of kind of live sort of like you, who will accept you. And that's hard, I think, in this day and age.
It is hard. And I feel like you just acknowledged like something really important and powerful, right? And what that thing is that a lot of us as mothers are, this is going to sound really harsh, but it's what I believe, are complicit in the things that make life difficult for us.
Oh, yes.
Like, we see ourselves as responsible for maintaining this image that says like, okay, I was a human with feelings one day, and then I birthed someone and my emotions were gone. My reactions were perfect. I was sanctified and blessed, and here I am, And so there is kind of like that isolation and discomfort when we step out and we embrace kind of like that black sheep identity that you just mentioned. And I have so many like thoughts about that, but the one that's like really sticking up right now is that motherhood is one of the few areas that I think women feel acknowledged and valued. And so if you break down that martyr idea, that sacrificial, let me give you everything and be like let me give you everything in the world. You're kind of surrendering some of your holiness for humanity.
Mm.
And who wants to feel like, if you felt rejected, who wants to feel less holy, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things I realized as well is especially when you're in that whole thing of being a martyr and I've got to put my feelings on the back burner for my children, you could end up resenting your child or your children. And you'd have to consider that. Suddenly you're going to find yourself saying, I did this for you and you didn't. How about you don't you don't
Yep.
put yourself there in the first
Yep.
place? Because the end of the day is the kids don't owe you anything, as harsh as that sounds. They did not ask to be here. They don't owe you good behavior. They don't owe you sort of, fitting in with this box that you've created for them. So
Yep.
don't give them a job as children. That's why I always say I don't want to give my children a job to make me feel better, to give me an identity, to do anything. Why am I giving them work at such a young age?
I like that. I've never thought of it that way. So I really appreciate that framing. And it also, again, kind of makes me think about how we expect our children to be indebted to us because we've chosen to be indebted to them. And that's not our job either.
Mm,
Like, one of the hardest things, like, is it my job to care for and show up for my child as best as possible? Yes. But it is also my job to model what healthy relationships look like for my children. And no relationship works effectively if you're exhausting yourself and giving
mm,
everything you have. That's
yeah.
relationship 101. You should be able to hold your wellness and someone else's simultaneously. And if you can't do that, things need
Mm.
to be reconfigured. And that's not to say, of course, that, like, because my kids, I have two littles. One is 8 and one is 5 going on 38. And she's tough. But neither, like, and I so we have a lot more stages to go.
Mm,
But in these stages, like, there's never been a situation where they couldn't benefit from being loved by as many people as possible, as opposed to me giving all of mine and being left, like,
yeah.
just kind of doing things compulsively with no joy, with resentment, with
Mm,
frustration.
yeah.
So yeah.
I wonder though, why do we accept that, especially as Black women? Why
Hmm.
have we accepted this whole thing of because I've even seen it online when somebody you know expresses their feelings about maybe mental health, and then a sort of older woman who's sort of done the parenting, in the thick of the parenting thing, will come along and sort of say, well, back in my day we just got on with it and there wasn't any of this stuff. And it's like, there probably was. You probably dealt with it with alcohol and
Yep. We
and
numbed
something
it.
else. you know
Mhm.
so let's not pretend that this is something that is happening now and the mothers of this generation are just weak somehow, because we're never
Oh,
meant to be strong like that anyway.
oh, oh my gosh, Paula. So first, like, I don't know if I can say this here, but fuck strong. I'm not
Yeah.
interested in being strong. I'm interested in being whole and nurtured.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that.
Mm-hmm.
But second, I had a conversation, like, I swear, like, every 6 months with this older woman who I love in the community. And at every opportunity, she's like, your generation is soft and y'all can't handle anything and blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah, blah. And, like, one time someone around my age was there while her and someone around her age was there. And we were like, well, if we're so soft and we can't handle anything, handle your own tech issues because you keep calling us. So
Yeah.
it was like a battle. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, well,
yeah.
look, since you're so tough, handle your own computer issues, print your own stuff,
Mm-hmm.
your own
Yeah.
flyers. But but yes, and like, but to your question, I think that the reason some of us accept this, like, framing and kind of like this gaslighting and rejection of experience, right? Or denial of experience, is because, or even less why we accept and more why they do. I think the reason they do that is because I think there are some of us who can kind of see beyond what is to what can be. And
Mm-hmm.
there are other people whose vision is kind of like I don't want to say limited to the now because that sounds really harsh. I think there are advantages to be able to focus and concentrate on a moment. I think there are advantages. But I think there are others of us that gets myself definitely that if I'm doing something and I feel like I'm doing it the laborious way, I'm like, no, like I don't want to do this way. Like there's a billion other ways to do this. And then people will be like, Ambreia, just do it. In the time you're talking about how it could be done differently, you could have been done. And I'll be like, no, it is
No.
the principle of the matter. So I feel like what is happening, because I think those people exist in our generation too.
Yeah.
I think that it becomes those who focus in on surviving the now versus those who have the vision to see what can be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we end up at conflict with each other. And I think that's like, I know that our politics are chaos in the United States. And from what I read, politics are chaos in the world right now.
Mm. Oh yeah.
Chaos. And I think like when we really get to, as the old folks say out here, the root of things, I think we end up where the strategies we pick in parenting and everything else are based in what our goals are. And some people want to survive what's right here, and other people want to thrive or create or manifest something bigger, you know?
Yeah.
And like use it. The reason that connects with me is because I find that I can daydream and what do they call it? World build all day. But I am likely to get depressed, anxious, overwhelmed if I am like looking around me and I'm like this is hell on earth. Everything is chaotic. There's conflict everywhere. And so I think there is room for those two groups to meet, but I think there needs to be like a shared acknowledgement of like, hey, you have at least in my case, you have a skill set to survive right now. I don't want all of that because I don't want to stay in this chaos. Give me a little, mentor me, show me what strategies you use that aren't denial, but allow you to process the world. And I'll offer you a little bit of vision so you can see what's possible. Because right now, I think you're short-sighted.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes, you know what else it could be is that sometimes people have this thing where if I struggled or if I pushed through, if I made it, then you should do the same.
Definitely.
Why they don't want to make it easier for you. And my thing is, why would I not want to make it easier for the next generation? I want it to be easier for my daughters. Why must we all just keep the struggle going? I don't understand that. You know,
it's like
it's
hazing.
such a bizarre thing. Yeah.
Yep. It's like, let me haze you into you want to see, or the one like that gets me is when people are like, oh, you think it's bad now? Just wait. And it's like, why would you tell me that? Like, I just told you I'm struggling and you tell me it's going to get worse.
That made me feel better.
It's just like, okay, meanie.
I would love to hear about, did you have any negative experiences in terms of childbirth? Because I know that, you know, if we look at the statistics, you know, how much more Black women die in childbirth than, say, white women. And there's obviously a lot to unpack there. And I wondered if there's anything that happened when you were having your babies that kind of made you,
Yes. So my transition to motherhood through birth is actually like the first kind of like flashing light that this wasn't going to work for me. And then I was going to have to create something different to be able to like exist. So with both of my children, I had a bit of hiccups in birth, but more specifically, my son, late in my pregnancy, probably around like 32 weeks or something like that, we found out that he had a kidney condition called hydronephrosis. It's fluid on the kidneys. And his condition in utero was pretty bad. It was pretty severe. I think it was a 3 out of 4 or 3.5 out of 4 of a possibility of severity. And so we learned, like, we had to change plans rapidly and drastically to start seeing like a neonatal specialist. And I had to drive, my husband and I had to drive like 100 miles to spend a week in Denver to prepare for birth. And all of these different things happened. And I'll share that expanded version of the story another time. But one of the two things stick out to me about my birth experience, and then I'll get to the third in a second. The first is that whether because of mistake or malice, they did not tell us as soon as they found out our son had kidney issues. I ended up asking a question because of something I read in the report. So
Wow.
there becomes that question of how
Mm-hmm.
much more time would we have had you
Yeah.
been more diligent, and let
Yeah.
us know this information earlier. So there was that. The second thing is, up until about a year and a half ago, the version of my birth story I had always told people was that I had that they had planned me for an induction because they wanted to be able
Mm.
to like check his kidneys and everything as soon as possible, and that it just so happened that I went into labor the day after my final doctor's appointment and beat my induction. And I had a
Mm.
huge source of like, I don't want to say joy because it was still a rough situation birthing in another place. But I was like, well, at least I didn't have to go the induction route, right?
Mm.
So last year, I was reading through my files again because my mind blocked out a lot of that. And I read that the notes from that last appointment and found out that the doctor had done a membrane sweep and had induced my labor with her
Mm.
fingers. And that is why I went into labor that day. So this whole time, I thought I had organically gone into labor,
Yeah.
and that's what she had done at that last appointment, and I didn't know.
You didn't know.
So yes, so started that in lies. And then when my son was finally here, thank God his kidneys ended up being not as rough as possible, and we've made it past
Mm.
that stage. But in the weeks after giving birth, I had retained placenta, which at the time I that's the only term I knew because that's
Mm-hmm.
what people had been calling it. And so again, in recent years, a lot of my work is maternal health writing, being aware of the 3 to 4 times higher risk that Black and Indigenous women face giving birth in the United States, and also from what I
Mm.
read, also in
Yeah.
um,
The UK, yeah.
in the UK. Um, and I ended up learning that what I had been referring to as retained placenta and hearing folks not reference often was the same as postpartum hemorrhage, which is the
Oh.
like one of the leading causes of death
Mm-hmm.
after you deliver. And so, like, not only having to go through that experience and having taken somewhere, my mind is kind of blocking it a little bit at this moment, but somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks for a provider to listen to me and
Mm.
realize that that's what was wrong, having to have an emergency surgery 800 miles from where I lived at the time, just
Wow.
just complete chaos, right? And also having to experience all of those things, the denial of information and autonomy and
Mm-hmm.
reality, as I know at this point, and ended up in a position where I was also trying to raise a newborn, right?
Mm.
Trying to be present, trying to produce milk, trying to do all of these different things, and realizing I'm not crazy, I've been failed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that lens was very instrumental. It like hit me smack dab as soon as I gave birth, of course,
Mm.
but it has served me so well on this motherhood journey where I'm able to check in and say, wait a second, are you crazy
Mm-hmm.
or are you being failed? And that framework has kind of helped me a lot.
It's funny because I have 4 kids, and with my second, my daughter, I was induced. So I was, and they said once we've done the induction, it's going to take, I don't know, a few hours before you start labor. But my labor started quickly. So I was
Mhm.
saying to them, I think I'm feeling something. And immediately this woman, this midwife, was dismissing my feelings. She's like, no, it's not going to take this, it's going to take much longer than this. So I was like, okay, so maybe it's just me. Maybe
Mhm.
I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm crazy. So then it started to get stronger and stronger. And they left me on the ward. They didn't give me a private room because they thought she was not in labor. So I have
Yeah.
people here visiting their pregnant family members, and I'm like trying to keep my noise levels down. And she kept, and when she'd come in, and I was like, "Can you examine me to make sure nothing's happening?" She goes, "Nothing is happening." She didn't even want to check. So when she left the room again, I just started to push because I'm like, I've had a baby before, so I'm not being, I don't know, hysterical new mum. And even if I wasn't a hysterical new mum, I still deserve to be listened
Deserve to
to,
be
you
validated,
know?
listened to. Yep.
And then she said, oh, I said I needed pain relief. And she said, well, we've got two options now. It's either some tablets or an injection. And I asked for the injection. And, she jabbed my leg with that injection with no care whatsoever. Like, there you go, sort of thing. And then she left the room again. And I said to myself, I'm just going to push. If I have this baby right here, we're having this baby right here. And then she comes in, finds me at the back of the bed because my son's dad had taken him to the neighbor. He wasn't there at that time. I was by myself with all these visitors. I was on the back of the bed pushing. She comes in like, "What are you doing?" I said, "The baby's coming." She gave an eye roll, examines me, and goes. There's a pause, and she was trying to decide what to do because the baby's head was right there. So now they put me on the gurney and they rushed me to the room, and literally 10 seconds later, my daughter was born, right? And I'm thinking to myself, why didn't you just listen to what I had to say? Why were you mad? It felt like she was mad at me. What are you mad about?
Why do you sound bothered? Like you could have worked somewhere else if you hate this much. We didn't tell you to come to work today.
And how long does it take to examine me? Examine, say no, everything's fine, go about your day. But it really, really upset me. I felt like even now when I remember it, it upsets me and it's marred. It just ruined my birth experience because whenever I think about my daughter being born, I think about being not being cared for, not my voice not being heard, having to fight to say the baby's coming, and having people go, no, I don't think it is. How can you just deny someone's reality like
It's
that?
just awful and ridiculous. And with my daughter, I had a similar experience. I ended up being induced with her. And but interestingly enough, I found out now I was induced with my son, but didn't know it, and had an epidural. And I was induced with my daughter and did it and we knew we were going that route. And I ended up having her without medication, partially because I wanted to, but also because when I chickened out and was like, I changed
No.
my mind. I want the epidural. The anesthesiologist, like he came in and I told you he was shooting the shit with the nurses and just talking. And by the time he put the kit together, I was like, "There's a baby coming out of me," and they were like, "Nuh-uh." And then I was like, "They didn't say obviously they didn't say obviously they didn't say nuh-uh,"
Yeah.
but they were like, "No, it's not time
It's
yet."
not.
And then she looked, and I was on all fours, and a baby was coming out. And I'll never forget like the stupid look on his face when he realized that he had been just running his mouth, and now and that I think about it, they better not have put that charge on my insurance.
you,
I
you
just
better go
thought
back
about
and
that.
check.
I just thought about that because again, he was just playing around. But even after having the children, so the second time, I knew I had retained placenta the first time, so I was very afraid of having it again. And the provider that I had, which was different than the first time, I told her like, "Hey, I'm really concerned about this. I'm having cramps," and I had to send her like 3 different emails to be like, "Hey, I'm having cramps. I'm concerned." And eventually I was like, "Can we just do an ultrasound?" And we look at the ultrasound, and I did have retained placenta again. And she was like, "I'm so glad we decided." Shut up. We didn't decide
Really,
nothing.
lady?
We didn't decide nothing. And thankfully we caught it after 2 weeks, I think, this time, instead of like as long as the last time. But it was just like that girl, ain't no we
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. And do you think you're a different person now? Like if you had to go back and if you were how you are now, do you think those experiences would have been a bit different for you?
That is a question I think about pretty often because like husband and I are trying to decide if the factory is shut down or if we want 3 children. And it depends on the day. Um, but I do think about that now, like me knowing the statistics, me like talking to so many people about advocating for themselves, and me having had that experience and being a more seasoned mother and an older person,
Yeah.
how things would go now versus then. Um, and I don't know. I do know that a lot of the folks who cared for me back then, they're not practicing anymore. So
Yeah.
that factor would be different. But I'm also like the complicated part about it is what happened to me shouldn't have happened to me or anyone, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And also, I'm a person who believes in post-traumatic growth.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a person who believes that me having, like, without those experiences, I would
Yeah,
literally not have a career. I would
yeah.
literally not
Yeah.
have the connections I have. We wouldn't be sitting here in this moment. Free Black
Mhm,
motherhood wouldn't exist, you know?
mhm.
And so I'm holding that this trauma shouldn't have happened to anyone. And also, I took it and I crafted it into something better. So if it happened today, I'd I would be upset. I would like acknowledge it, and I would also once again craft it to something better.
Mm. So I would love to know how do you think it's changed you? That this kind of journey that you've been on, all the studying that you've done, all the work that you've done, the talks you've given, research. How has that changed you and impacted your relationship with your kids, do you think?
Mm. I think in good ways and bad ways.
Mm.
I think the good ways are that I I have gotten much. I think I would have been this way anyway, because as we discussed, I'm kind of a black sheep. But I think that it has encouraged me to see my children as a source of like knowledge and a teachers
Mm.
um in a faster way than I might have the other way. I still think I would have gotten there,
Yeah.
but I think just being able to be in community with folks like you and others like that are
Mm.
actively talking about what it looks like to see your children as human from the start.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, like not have a waiting period on their humanity. Uh,
Hmm.
I think that that has been the positive, right?
Yeah.
I think, or one of the positives. Um, and I think it reminds me like, hey, you don't have to spend all your time socializing because I am a person that thinks I need to do some socializing of my kids. Um, but also I don't have to spend all my time socializing. I can spend some of it just enjoying them because the idea of enjoying your children is so foreign. I'm still
Yeah.
working on it myself, but we
Mhm.
just frame them as responsibility.
Yes.
It's like you really want to have this thing. So many people put in so much effort to have children and then you don't enjoy them. You
It's just
just
work. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
silly.
Hmm.
So there's that. But in terms of like not so great things, is I'm dare I say, over studious of the experience. So I feel
Mm.
like I have to like learn everything, know everything, catalog everything. And so when my writing and my advocacy work are so closely intertwined with my parenting,
Mm.
that separation can feel really challenging sometimes. Like, I don't know if you've seen them, but I'll like have little conversations that like me and the kids will chat and I'll ask them permission to record to re-record the conversation and upload them. And we don't do those a lot on purpose
Hmm.
because like I don't want them to think everything about our lives is for public consumption.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Um, and that's why, like free Black motherhood, I am the free Black mother. My
Yeah.
kids aren't the free Black mother, you know? And so, like, I don't have an issue with it, but a lot of pages focus on, like, here's what the child learned. And my page isn't about children learning, it's about
Yeah.
me learning.
That's right. Absolutely.
So, and I feel like that's kind of rare, you know? And
It is.
so
Yeah.
like the other day I was talking, I think to my daughter. And so there's a video that's doing like one of my videos I uploaded recently that's getting a lot of engagement. And it was, my daughter asked me like why adults parents specifically put in so much effort to give their children the best lives, but don't make sure they have good lives
Mm.
themselves, right? And
Mm.
brilliantly insightful question. Not surprised that it's having a lot of interaction. But a few days later, I asked her like, oh, not without a camera involved. I asked her like, well, why do you excuse me, what do you need different from me? Right? Like, is there some way you want me to show up so you feel more heard? And then she said, I have the note somewhere. She said something like, I want you to take care of yourself. And
Oh,
and she was like, that's how you can show up for me. And
yeah.
again, it was a wonderfully like it would have been really easy to like take that take that moment and say, hey, do I have permission to record that? And, just kind of continue.
Yeah.
But I notice that when they say like really insightful things, they'll say, Mom, do you want to put that online? And I
Mhm.
like that they are asking the question and leading the experience. But when they start saying things like, how many likes does it have? How many comments does it have?
Yeah.
Because my son is obsessed with YouTube and he's like, I wish I had a YouTube so people could subscribe.
Yeah.
And all of that. I don't ever want to get to a position where I'm treating my children like an attraction.
Yeah.
And it's hard because like I know we all have like really brilliant children, but my children are ridiculously brilliant. Like they are off the charts. And my mom and my husband and I are always talking because these kids could easily be like actors, like
Yeah.
in media, something,
Mhm.
because they just do this stuff with no scripts off the top of their head, but it makes it harder to maintain their childhood because they seem so precocious.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I'm just trying to be, I guess to circle back to your question to be more clear in my answer, is the challenge is making sure that I am not taking my motherhood experience and passing on and adultifying my children as I kind of work my way through my journey. And I'll just be like, no, my whole brand is a lie. I
Yeah.
just faked a butt. And it's just like, and then I'll like always have like the debrief and the reconciliation and the mom shouldn't have done that and all that other stuff, conversation with the kids. And my husband's approach to parenting is different. So neither of us are like disciplined first parents, but
Mhm.
he doesn't think that like popping for attention is inherently bad. And I try to avoid it at all costs. And so
Yeah.
there's that interesting dynamic you have access to that someone else doesn't, and they would literally kill for it at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, I guess I'll say all that to say is that I mother myself by allowing myself to be grateful for who I've been and who I'm becoming, as
Mm,
opposed to who I have to be later. Because
yes.
there's always this, motherhood is nothing but forward looking. Like, take care of yourself so you can birth a happy baby. Feed your baby
Yeah.
this so you can raise a healthy baby. Be
Yeah.
nice to your baby so you can have, like, everything is future, future, future. Nothing
Mhm.
is right now.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm trying to mother and nurture myself by, just like I want my children to feel good right now, I deserve to feel good right now. And that's
Yes.
by learning to
Absolutely.
be grateful, by being connected, and all of those things. So I'll say that before I keep going.
Amen to that. Before I let you go, though, tell us about where we can find you online and anything else that you've got coming up at the moment.
Yes, yes. So you can find me online most often at Instagram at like my hashtag is Freeblackmotherhood. I also have the website freeblackmotherhood.com. But I like, as cheesy as it sounds, I have a very unique last name, Meadows-Fernandez. If you search that in Google, there are literally like hundreds of articles of
Mm.
me like looking at both abstract and practical parts of like motherhood experiences. Um, I have like I'm still getting messages from folks for articles I wrote in like the Washington Post or the New York Times like years ago, talking about like what some of the conversations I've been having mean for others' experiences. And I am hoping before the end of the year to start hosting kind of like motherhood discussion spaces,
Mm.
and to like just be a place. Like, I had this idea today, and you can tell me if it sounds cheesy to you, but I was reading this book, and I love reading, and I think about how like a lot of moms don't really have time to sit down and read books, but
Mm.
also how like everyone's not a reader like me. There are auditory learners, there are visual learners, kinesthetic learners. And I was just like, what if, like, every once in a while, a group of us just got together on Zoom and I just read one chapter from the book I was reading out loud? And
Mm.
we could have a talk about one chapter, because a whole book may feel too much for somebody. It may be overwhelming and stressful. You could listen to someone read while you're cooking, while you're moving around with your kids. And like, yeah, you could listen to an audiobook, but they wouldn't have cheesy comebacks
Yeah.
and weird things to say like me. So
Yeah. I love that
I,
idea.
yeah, so that's something I've been chewing on. But I also want you to let us know, because we're going to release this together.
Yeah.
Tell us, so just kind of backtracking, I wish I would have thought to do this in the beginning. Tell us about you and tell us where everyone can find you, Paula.
Yes, well, I do two things. I work with young girls, trying to build up their self-esteem, resilience. I do workshops, like well-being and empowerment workshops for young girls. But then I
Mhm.
also do like parent coaching and support and advice. So one-to-one coaching, group coach. I think that a lot of people are, just want some advice. It's not easy out here, but there's so many people online. There's all these books, but what you need is for someone to come and speak to your specific
Mhm.
issue. And my thing, like we said earlier in the episode, is it's about being parent centric. So when someone comes and says, "How can I get my child to do this?" I always say, first, we've got to deal with ourselves. What are you telling yourself about the situation? What story have you concocted? Where is
Mm.
this rooted in? What is this based in? Why are you even reacting how you're reacting? Why do you do what you do? So these are all the things. I just try to bring a lot of self-awareness. I think that's the beginning of everything. So that's what my coaching is about, self-awareness. Because if you don't know yourself, you don't know anything. You're not going to be able to function. You're going to go down the wrong alley because you don't know what you like, what you don't like. So
Mhm.
that's my the main things that I do. And that's over at accelerateempowerment.com, because my
Okay.
whole thing is trying to get to the best version of yourself. And that's why I work with young people, because the younger we can start this stuff, the better, for everyone.
Yes.
And I'm on Facebook, Paula L. Sampson, and I am on Instagram as well, with this podcast, Untriggered Parenting Podcast. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
So, oh yes, and my podcast is Free Black Motherhood. So hearing you talk about like resilience and growth and stuff for youth, we're gonna have to come back and chat about that. I have so many youth stories.
Oh, you do? Do you know what? I don't even want to let you go, but I think it's only fair. It's been an hour, so we should probably wrap up. I think we're gonna
Look, I don't
probably
want to
wrap up
go,
time.
but like I know folks will get antsy listening and
Yeah,
90, 200 minutes and stuff. So, but we
exactly.
can plan another one because this was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been so lovely speaking to you. I feel like every time you're talking to me, I've got you've got 50 ideas going I want to say, but we'll have to save that for another time. But thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge with me today. It's been great.
Thank you for hosting and for your questions and just for your existence.
Oh, thank you.